stick on something here. And thanks for everyone to tuning in. We're just discussing the Cheltenham first to go, and neither of us know anything about that. But Paul Hackett, the CEO,
you know a lot more than I do, Nick.
Paul Hackett, the CEO of Click&Go, certainly knows a lot about the travel business. Paul, Click&Go, what is Click&Go? Tell us something about the company.
We're an online travel company based in Dublin. We set up in 2010, height of the last recession. Pre-COVID, we had 63 staff here in our Dublin office. We opened an office in Poland about 3 years ago, and we operate under the Click&Go brand. We also run holidays with Aer Lingus for Aer Lingus, and we run Fly Shannon for Shannon Airport.
Okay.
So we would be probably the largest of the Irish Indigenous online travel companies.
There's obviously not much going on at the moment, but what was last summer like for you last year after the first lockdown was eased?
Well, you know, our business, the travel industry, effectively ceased trading on the 1st of March 2020. So there literally was no travel. There was tiny pieces operating when they had the quasi traffic lights and the kind of green list, depending on whatever color shade of green was operating at the time. It didn't inspire confidence. People weren't traveling. Government advice was very much against travel. So our sector has been 95 to 100% down for 12 months. And looks like we're going to be at that level for quite a few months to come.
And of course, there are official sanctions to back that all up. You know, what is the current legal situation for someone who wants to try and get off this benighted isle, as I put it, you know, who wants to go to the airport and go away?
Well, I call it the island of negativity. So we have quite a few legal impediments to travel at the moment. There's three statutory instruments in place specifically around travel, and they're quite clever because they can just be passed in the Dáil, no vote required. Minister signs it, and that's law. So first one of those is an absolute requirement to have a negative PCR test on arrival into Ireland. The next one is a very interesting one, statutory instrument 29, a prohibition on traveling to an airport or port.
Okay.
The next one is number 30, and that's the implementation of a fixed fine based on traveling to a port or ferry port.
And that started off at what, 500 or 250?
That started off at 500, and there was quite a bit of coverage. I think it was around the 100 initially, and then there was the coverage of the people on holidays in Gran Canaria and the people going to Tenerife for dentist work. So then it was moved up to 500, and that has now moved to 2,000 per person as per the Health Amendment Bill, which was signed by the President 2 weeks ago this weekend.
So anyone who I mean, I don't expect many people are prepared to pay that level of fine to get out of the country at the moment. It's a real clampdown, isn't it?
Like the travel as a business has been demonized, I think somewhat unfairly and somewhat disproportionately. The travel industry was calling for pre-departure airport testing months ago. When we spoke to the Joint Oireachtas Committee back in October, we said, look, we really want pre-departure airport testing. The airlines wanted it, the airports wanted it, the travel industry wanted it, the destinations wanted it. It wasn't done. There was a quasi argument with the medics over whether antigen is sufficient testing. Nothing was put in place. The variants walked in, and travel gets blamed for that. But travel, in effect, was one of the sectors that was really pushing for a better control on testing and better control on tracing.
What about the other side then? On the incoming side, the Health Amendment Bill, one of its provisions, of course, is for quarantine hotels. So is there anyone else in the EU doing this?
No.
Just Ireland?
Just Ireland. Again, I think it comes down to, like, if we take a step back and have a look at Ireland over the last period of time, all of our politicians are talking the same talk. For the most part, the media is in line with that. So everything is one step. And it was almost trying to outdo each other with demonizing travel, demonizing aviation. And I think there was a huge kind of blind spot with regard to the economic contribution that this sector makes and the number of people who work in this sector. Like 140,000 people work in the aviation sector alone in terms of the airlines and airports. Another 250,000 work in the domestic hospitality sector. We don't have sufficient population to sustain domestic tourism in this country. International tourism accounts for 75% of the income in that sector. So you have 400,000 jobs, you have a massive economic contribution to the economy that is required in order that we can sustain our health service and other services which we wish to provide.
As you try to plan your business for the next few months, and even Neffet was saying last night that, look, don't expect any change to international travel before the end of June. How do you plan in that scenario? And also, I mean, what's the story in the UK? Are they any more progressive than we are?
Oh, very much. Like in terms of the statutory instruments and those legal restrictions, for the most part, they're in place until the 30th of April. So they're not necessarily linked to the current April 5th review of the level 5 lockdown. They're there until the 30th of April. In terms of planning for next year or for this year, like in January, the CMO, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach all came out and basically said, look, you're not going to travel internationally this year. The only beach you're going to see is the beach at home. So it looked like there was no travel prospect for 2021 at all. I think as the vaccine rollout gathers pace, and it hasn't been anything but laggard up to now, I think as that gathers pace, and then we have the EU yesterday coming out with their proposals around digital green certificates, we are going to see some movement towards travel, and it needs to be restored because, number one, the sectors can't survive. And if we are having vaccination rollout, that means we're minimizing the risk. But your last question.
Yeah, go back to the UK for a second, because their vaccination is ahead of ours. So how does that?
If we look at the UK, this is going to be very interesting. And I think this is going to be very interesting from a number of perspectives. So Boris Johnson made a speech on the 22nd of February, and he said, this is my plan for getting the UK out of lockdown. And he gave really 3 key dates. He said, on the 12th of April, I'm going to give you an update about international travel. On the 17th of May, I'm going to open up domestic tourism. So all domestic tourism opens up on the 17th of May. And 5 weeks later, on the 21st of June, he's saying all restrictions will be ended in the UK. Now, there are provisos there in that he is insisting that the vaccination rollout go at the pace that it's at, that they don't have pressure on case numbers, and that they don't have pressure on their hospital service. So any of the states in Europe that are planning reopening are doing so, in conjunction with public health, but they're probably putting a more balanced view as to how they can open up. So, from the 17th of May, UK domestic travel is going to operate.
So how is that impacted on, say, the travel trade in the UK? Have people been booking holidays?
Massively. The week of the 22nd of February, which is the last week in February when Boris Johnson made this statement, our UK competitors who operate out of the UK market as well had an equivalent week of 2019, which was, pre-COVID. So all of our suppliers in Spain and in the US and in different countries were contacting us going, what's happening in Ireland? Are you guys asleep? The UK is back booking holidays because on the basis of what Boris said, the clear guidelines, clear timelines and dates.
Well, in fairness to him and to us, I mean, their AstraZeneca rollout was way ahead of ours earlier in the year and still is.
Oh, totally. Totally. But I think, if we're going to be realistic about reopening and we have a balanced approach to understanding the impact of the pandemic, we need dates. We need to know what are the criteria on which we're going to do things. We can always say we will open X subject to the numbers being A, B, and C within the various categories. Yeah. We don't seem to have any of that visibility or clarity.
Yeah, because looking at the figures here, so, nearly all the casualties from COVID have been in the over 70s cohort, and there's 720,000 of them in the population. So we're at 455,000 vaccinated now. Now, they're not all elderly people, some of them are health workers, etc. But you would expect that 720,000 people, at the latest by the end of May, they should all have their shots. And Neffet must know that, the HSE must know that. And therefore, they can set a date, can't they?
You would think.
If they wanted to.
You would think. And we need that to happen. We need the politicians to take back a little bit more of the control that they have ceded to Neffet and the medics, because we are being told that we're going to get 1 million doses of vaccine April, May, and June. We've only 4.9 million people on the island. So if we're getting 1 million in April,
actually, 1 million in the Republic.
In the Republic, yes, sorry, in the Republic. So, based on that, we're going to be way ahead of those particular numbers. Up until last week, before the AstraZeneca pause was put in place, the Irish government had an ad on radio, on TV, saying 80% of the population in the Republic would be vaccinated by the 30th of June. So on the one hand, they're able to script an advert, put it out on national media and say 80% of the population will be vaccinated by the 30th of June. But on the other hand, we're not getting any clarity. And there's entire economic sectors, not just our own, not just travel, not just aviation, not just hospitality. There are other sectors that are being, hung out to dry and left almost ignored. We're almost like the silent minority that exists within the economy.
But having said all that, your realistic current expectation, Paul, is that you don't expect to be booking people out of Ireland on planes and into properties in the sunspots until the autumn. Is that correct?
No, yeah, our view pre the EU announcement this week was that the earliest possible date that we would be happy to take bookings was September. Now, we think the EU date might improve that for us. We believe that the digital green certificate.
Talk a bit about that. This is the digital green certificate, which has been proposed by the European Commission. It's a proposal for a regulation to make it easier to travel within Europe, given the current circumstances.
They're
putting their weight behind it, but it's just a proposal. It has to be agreed by the Council and the Parliament. But
it has to be agreed by.
Tell us what this certificate would involve, Paul.
So the digital green certificate was announced on Wednesday, on St. Patrick's Day. And it is a certificate, not a passport. And I think that's important because some of the EU member states were seeing some objections from their own citizens with regard to using the word passport or it being considered a vaccine passport. So this is not a vaccine passport. It's a combination of areas. And if you complete any one of the 3 areas within this certificate, you should be able to travel within the EU member states. So if you have had a vaccine, if you have not had a vaccine but have had a negative PCR test result, or if you've had COVID and recovered, and the digital green certificate will cover all 3 of those areas. If you qualify under any one of those, you should be allowed travel within the EU. And this is a proposal at this stage. It does have to be approved by a majority of member states and the European Parliament. And also they say that if any state wishes to maintain quarantine or additional test requirements, they can do so, but they're going to have to make a case to the Commission with their reasons to explain why. Yeah. And we're going to struggle to do that, Nick, because we, as you know, share a border with Northern Ireland, 500-kilometre porous border with Northern Ireland. Ryanair, very interestingly, announced 8 new routes out of Belfast City Airport the other week. We are going to see the UK and Northern Ireland open up for international travel by the 21st of June at the latest, possibly earlier. It will be some date between the 17th of May and the 21st of June. And what are we going to do down here? We're going to sit blissfully watching our friends in the north of Ireland go on holidays to wherever they wish to go, where at that point we should have had reasonable vaccines, again, going back to the Irish government's advertising campaign, 80% by the 30th of June. And we should have the EU proposal for the digital green passport in place. So if we're vaccinated.
The Commission is talking about this digital green certificate having the infrastructure at the centralised end in Brussels in place by mid-June. But the system will only work for Ireland, for Irish people, if you like our government signs up to the back end. And that you have to be able to collate, someone has to collate all the information in Ireland vis-a-vis vaccination, for instance. And
yes.
Stick it in the central repository, it goes on to the certificate. Do you anticipate any enthusiasm in Ireland to do that?
No, it's going to be very difficult. Like I miscalled it. I called it a passport there where it's a certificate. But, and the actual IT infrastructure piece is a worry because we can see that as being one of the reasons for the slow rollout of the vaccine in this country. We are aware that the IBM and Salesforce contract was only being discussed or being signed pre-December. We're not quite sure if that's fully in place at this stage. We don't have an integrated system, IT system for the health service in this country that can track all of us across all of our various health requirements. So I think the vaccine piece is going to be the first piece of that. So perhaps the IBM Salesforce piece could be repurposed into working for the certificate.
Let's assume that at some stage the government doesn't extend SI 29. In other words, it stops being an offence to go to the airport and get fined for doing so. Assuming then you can do that and go somewhere. And assuming also that the Irish will be laggards in producing this certificate, will you be able to go to, say, Malta or to Spain or to Italy or to Greece without this certificate if you don't have it?
Well, I think what they're trying to achieve by having the certificate is, ensuring that we have a safe restart to international travel. If you have been vaccinated, if you have a negative PCR test, or they're even suggesting antigen, but they're suggesting antigen subject to some qualifications, or if you've recovered from COVID, in real terms, you're at minimal risk. And that's what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to achieve a scenario whereby the member states are able to travel freely between each other. And there's the provision also for bilateral agreements between member states and the likes of the UK, and between member states and the likes of the US. Like, the reality is we are going to have to open up. We cannot afford to have this lockdown mentality and this lockdown island approach. Not only is travel all about leisure, travel is also about corporate travel. Enterprise Ireland and IDA having done wonderful jobs in creating a really integrated foreign direct investment, economy in Ireland. The need for corporate travel, the M&A piece, all of that is an absolute when it comes to travel.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that they, because I mean the Commission is kind of, I see they're saying here in their handout, EU member states need to move fast with preparations and rollout, and this is kind of even before they've got out of the starting blocks hardly, but you can see that the Commission is quite intent on urging member states to come to a joint commitment to tackle this issue.
I think that's a key part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to get a coordinated, harmonized approach to the reopening of travel. And I think what the medics, the government and NPHET need to see is that this is very responsible. This is very conscious of public health. This is working in tune with what they are trying to achieve. And it's trying to create that balance, because we cannot exist in a singular world of COVID. We have to manage to live with COVID. And I think that the proposals on the Digital Green Certificate allow for, a planned safe reopening of travel. And it's going to happen in other member states. And we just simply cannot afford to be left behind. And we cannot afford, in terms of inbound travel into this economy, 250,000 jobs depend on this. So, the hospitality and hotel sector depend on this. It's not as if somebody is saying, pay no heed to vaccination, pay no heed to testing, pay no heed to recovery. They're incorporating the key elements that should make it safe.
Well, the very prevalent lockdown mentality that exists in Ireland at the moment, the government say that it reflects the will of the people. And in fairness, there are quite a few opinion polls that show, let's continue this lockdown indefinitely and go further, like if from the left to the right of this political spectrum. But I know that you think we're not all in this together, and I think you'd be speaking up for some of the. I was working it out there that there's actually 700,000 people who are not either on the public payroll, but who run businesses or are self-employed or small businesses, and they're 20% of the population. So they're being drowned out by the rest to some extent, and I think that's a view that you have.
Oh, like if I hear we're all in this together once more, I will lose it. This is such a divided pandemic. The public sector is entirely protected. Not only are they on 100% of their salary, but they also managed to get a pay rise, and fair play to them. That's fine. However, the public sector and the government sector are making decisions about the rest of us. And the opinion polls may point to a majority of people saying, yeah, and we're in favor of lockdown, but they're refusing to provide the accurate data. Can we please have an opinion poll on the people who have been financially hammered by the pandemic versus those who have not? If you're working in a sector that has had zero impact financially, you're in a very comfortable position. COVID is a horrific pandemic, and it's very uncomfortable to be living through lockdowns. But if you're not financially impacted and your job security is not threatened, or you haven't already lost your job, you're in an entirely different place to all of my staff, to all of the staff who work in the aviation industry and the airport industry, to everybody who works in hospitality, pubs, restaurants, etc., etc. So there is a minority of us, because the private sector is about 2 million. So let's look at that 2 million, and even take the 2 million apart. Anybody who's on EWSS or the PUP, which is about 800,000 people, about 40% of the private sector is impacted by this. We are, massively financially impacted, and we're dealing with the stress of family and friends and the pandemic. But to say that we're all in this together just is absolutely trite. Like, we have no public servant has had 50% of their salary cut. We even have stories, anecdotal, I'm not quite sure how true they are, but we have anecdotal stories of some, agencies where the staff are working 50% of the time and getting 100% of the salary. Or better still, apparently, Office of Public Works work 1 day a week and get 100% of their salary. And we have public servants who can go to their boss and say, I'm a public servant, I can't get childcare. In that situation, they don't have to work. They look after their kids and they get 100% of their salary. So they're getting 100% of their salary and effectively they're doing the childcare role, so they're saving money. So yes, I can see why the opinion polls are making this out. We also have some people on social welfare who are better off now than they were pre-pandemic. So we're creating a very dangerous environment for the recovery, because for quite a chunk of people, it suits them that this continues in terms of the working from home, working less and earning the same, working nothing and earning the same, compared to the private sector, compared to my staff on anything up to 50% pay cuts. Some of the airline staff on 30% pay cuts are out of work. All of the pub hospitality people out on the pub. Like it's just not sustainable. So it's a very, very divided pandemic. And really, I wish the media would start calling out that we are not all in this together. And I wish the public servants would begin to understand that the private sector, the SME sector, and it's the small SME sector that is really being hammered most seriously here. We are a key funder for this economy. And nobody seems to be thinking in terms of how we're acquiring debt and the requirement that that debt has to be repaid. There's implications for what we're doing. We're seeing talk today in the newspapers about the interest rates possibly rising. So like it's a falsehood to think that we can just go on borrowing at this level and assume that everything will be rosy. It won't.
Well, you're obviously not bottling up anything today, Paul, in fairness. But I mean, all those things you've just been talking about there and how they affect your business and yourself. So does it get in on you at all?
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. It's been the most challenging year, and I think for anybody who's running a business, it's horrendous because you're out of control. It doesn't matter what plan or what forecast you work to, how the business survives, whether it survives, whether you continue to get supports, whether you don't. The level of those supports depends on somebody else and somebody who you pretty much can't influence.
Well, the support, I mean, they have told everyone that the supports go on till the end of June, so there is some visibility on that at least.
No, we know now, but like with all due respect, like we had a briefing with all of our teams mid-February, and the supports at that point were until the end of March, and our team were worried, what would the business do if the supports end at the end of March? A couple of weeks later, we got clarity, but it was within 5 to 6 weeks of how close that was going to be. And the 30th of June is looming, and we have everything that you see in today's paper calling out that the lockdown has to continue right into the summer, and that we're not even sure that the 5K rule will be relaxed, and there's no balance. There's no balance, Nick. There's no proportionality here, and there is a group of people whom it suits for this to continue indefinitely, and those of us that can and think otherwise should say so.
When it all ends, where's the first place you'll head off to?
Well, my favorite place is, I just love Spain. I just love getting on a plane to Barcelona and heading down to Sitges. So I would do that. And after that, I don't really care where I go. You
want to go somewhere though.
I want off this island. Like I really do want to get off this. I love it in terms of, I have loved it in terms of living here. This year is the first time I have ever thought, do you know what? I almost don't want to live here anymore, because it's become a very ugly place to live. In terms of the decision making, in terms of, I think, some of the human behaviors that we've seen during the pandemic, not pleasant.
There's a lot of your offices down in Talbot Street, and in a normal times be some good boozers for you to go in there, have a stiff one ahead of the Gold Cup. But are there any good eateries around there for your usual lunch break?
Well, the two favourites for here would have been the Bon Crubine, just up the road. Really great food, lovely atmosphere, great service. And there's a super little Thai restaurant just behind the police station, just behind the Garda station on a store street called Thai Spice. Yeah, thoroughly recommend it. It's still open for takeaway, which is great. So if I'm here and kind of not too keen on cooking when I get home, or the other half wants something, then it's straight into Thai Spice and get some nice
Well,
food.
look, you as in our pre-chat, you named 3 horses for the Gold Cup today: Album Photo, A Plus Tard, and Santini. So now you got to pick one.
Well, my dad has said you can't pick favorites. So, like, I know A Plus Tard has everything going for it as a horse. Rachel Blackmore on board and trained by Henry de Bromhead, but I'm going to opt for Santini.
Yeah, it's kind of, it sounds like a Greek island of some sort.
Yeah, kind of. Santorini, flights with Ryanair, flights with Aer Lingus.
Okay. Well, best of luck with that. Well, listen, Paul, thanks very much for joining us today. I mean, yeah, I really, we got a very good impression of what life is like in the lockdown travel sector. And
not easy, but hopefully getting better. Okay. And we're resilient, Nick. We'll survive.
Thanks very much. And thanks also to our sponsor, Mazda. And thanks for everyone to tuning in. And we'll see you again.
Cheerio.